Hello everyone and welcome back to part 2, the basic tagging lecture. In this lecture, we're going to go over some basic heading and paragraph tags. And tags are basically a way to allow you to insert elements into an HTML file. And we're also going to be showing you a few resources to use as a reference as you continue learning about HTML. Let's go ahead and get started by opening our Atom text editor and a browser. I'll see you there. Alright, here I have a split screen between the Atom text editor and my browser, and this is actually a view we're going to be using a lot in the course because we'd like to see changes and not have to jump back and forth between the browser and the text editor. So a lot of times you'll see me just have a split screen like this, so I can just refresh the page in the browser when I'm actually doing edits in the Atom text editor. But before we get started on continuing working with this basics.html file from the last lecture, what I want to discuss are two resources online that you're going to be running into a lot as you do some Google searches for terms in case you ever need to reference some sort of resource. And those two resources are something called w3schools.com and the other one is the developer.mozilla.org website. And here I've just searched for HTML element tags on Google. You'll notice that the very first hit is this w3schools.com. And usually when you ask Google for some basic question on HTML or CSS, a lot of times the very first link that pops up is a w3schools.com. And w3schools.com is basically just a very large reference site for front-end web development like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And you'll notice that as you go through the website, it'll basically just give you a bunch of resources and references for a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about in this course. So if you ever Google stuff and you find yourself on this website, feel free to check it out. Now, it's an okay website. Mainly the main reason you see it as the top hit is just because it's been around so long. But I would actually suggest that when you're Google searching and you come up with a reference to this developer.mozilla.org site, you actually choose this site instead. It's a little better, it has more detail, and it's really geared towards developers. So if you click on this developer.mozilla.org link, it has an HTML element reference, and this is basically a reference to all the HTML elements. And HTML elements are just going to allow us to actually insert material into our HTML text file. And you see here that it's a little more technical and it's a little more geared towards developers, while the w3schools.com website is geared more towards basic beginners. And as you advance through this course, you're probably going to find this developer.mozilla.org site more useful to you. So I just want to let you know that these are two resources you're going to be coming through in contact with a lot as you do some Google searching on your own. Okay, now that we've covered that, let's jump back to this browser tab where I have the basics.html file that we've been working with last time opened up here. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up here. And to get a little more room on my screen, I'm actually going to close or collapse this left tab here. And I can do that just by doing either Control / or Command / on your keyboard. And that just opens and collapses that little side tab. So a really useful shortcut for the Atom text editor. Now the first tag we're going to be learning about are the header tags, or a heading tag. And let's show you how to do that. To start off, we'll do a heading 1 tag, or a header 1 tag. And basically we just have h1 open and then h1 closed. And then anything in between this, any text, is going to be a header. So this is a, we'll call them heading 1. And then I'm going to save this, so just either Control or Command S, make sure that's saved, and I'm going to refresh this, and we see now on our web page, we see this is a heading 1. And basically a heading produces a larger font that is bold. And we're going to learn a lot more about how to actually dictate text styles such as font size, whether something is bold or italic, later on in the course. We'll cover a little bit about bold and italics in this lecture, but later on we'll actually talk about more styling for this actual font. For now, we can just explore the very basics of HTML and what your browser does by default. If heading 1 is too big for you, well, you can actually have heading 2. And you'll notice that Atom Text Editor actually provides us with these autocomplete options. So you can just go down here on your keyboard and then hit enter on one of these. And you'll notice we automatically get the opening and closing tag. So you'll find yourself using that a lot as you continue on through this course. And we'll type something like this is a heading 2, save that, and then refresh our page here. and we see we get a same heading, so it's in bold, but it's a little smaller. And there's actually a heading 3, so we can do that as well. We'll call this heading 3, save this, refresh, and we notice we get an even smaller heading, etc. And this actually goes all the way down to heading 6, which is going to be the smallest heading possible. So you'll notice that it's actually still in bold, but it's very small. If you just want essentially what is a normal text size, you can use what is known as a paragraph. And that's just a P. So I'm going to write this is a paragraph. 1G, save this, and then refresh. And you'll notice that we get this is a paragraph, which is just here in normal text. It's not in bold, and we're ready to go there. But something to note is that each of these lines with the new tags is basically in its own block. And headings are their own block, as well as paragraphs. So paragraph tags can actually create separation. And let me show you what I mean by that. If I, over here in my HTML file, try to write on multiple lines, so I say this is a paragraph, this is line 2, then this is line 3. If I save this and then refresh this, notice that I don't actually get that effect that I was looking for in my HTML file when it gets displayed in my browser. It all goes into one continuous line. If I actually want separate blocks, I need to separate them into actual different tags, which means I would need to have each of these separate lines in its own paragraph tag. So I would have to have this be, this is line 2, and then this one be line 3. So this is line 3 right here, and paste it in, and then grab this closing tag and let's stick it back to the original right there. Now let's save this, and if we refresh this, we can see that now they're all in their separate blocks. And something to note here is that your HTML file doesn't really care about indentation. What it really cares about are just these tags. That's what's really going to define how lines are built and how blocks are separated. So I can actually put multiple paragraph tags on the same line here. So we'll do this, put them all on line 14, just to show you what I mean. So here I have all those 3 paragraph tags on the same line. They're all on line 14. If I save this again and refresh, I get the exact same effect. So it's really the tags that are telling HTML what is in the same block, not the actual line number or the indentation. In other programming languages, you'll use brackets, or in Python, you a lot of times use indentation to clarify which blocks goes where. In HTML, it's basically all done by tags. And you notice I can keep writing on separate lines here. So whoops, let's delete that. Say something like, this is continued. I'm still writing in line 2. Save this, and if I refresh this, you notice that since that's all contained in this second paragraph tag, it all goes here. All right. So that's the very basics of what a heading tag is and what a paragraph tag is. Things to note there is that headings can go from 1 to 6, so H1 to H6, and what makes them a little different is their size and the fact that they're in bold. And then we have, for normal text, paragraph tags. And something that'll be really useful is a lot of times you need filler text, and what Atom Text Editor and Sublime Text Editor have for you is the lorem ipsum statement, which is basically just a bunch of filler Latin text. And if you start typing lorem, notice you get this little pop-up here. Go ahead and just select that and hit enter, and you'll get a bunch of code, or text here I should say, and it's basically just a bunch of filler text that's really common to use in web development in case you just need some filler text. So if I save this and refresh this page, notice now I get, it tells me if I want to translate it. No, because it's in Latin, but you just get a bunch of filler text here in Latin. So this is really common to use as you need filler code for your web development, and you can do it just by typing in lorem and then hitting enter in either Sublime Text Editor or an Atom Text Editor. It works in both. All right, saving that there, let's refresh this, and I remove that. The last thing I want to cover is bold and italics. Now, there was actually an old way of showing bold and italics in HTML, and there's a newer syntax for it. Let me show you the old way first, and then I'll show you the new way. So let me delete these paragraphs and just type in something very simple. We'll say this is text that is in bold, and then below it we'll say this is text that is in italics. Whoops, italics. Okay. So if I actually want to make this bold, the old way would be to do it with a B call. So what I would end up doing is wrapping this whole thing, or whatever I want it to be bold, in B. So it would look like this. So we call our closing tag B here. And if you just type in B, Atom Text Editor will also give you the autocomplete for the bold. I'm going to save this and then refresh. And notice here that it says now this is text that is in bold. So this is the old way of doing bold text. And the old way of doing italic text is with an I call, or an I tag. So we'll notice here we see I for italic, which means if I wrap this whole thing in open and close I tags and save this and refresh, I get now that this text is in italics here. So we can see that this is text that is in bold and this is text that is in italics. That was the old way of doing things. There's a newer semantic way because B and I aren't very clear on exactly what they're doing since they're just two letters. And you always want to be really clear when you're coding, especially if you're going to come look at this code in the future. So the newer semantic way of doing stuff is if you want text to be bold, the new keyword for that is a strong tag. So this works in basically exactly the same way as the bold tag, except now it just says strong. So that might be a little clearer when you come back to your code that you know that it's going to be in bold. And we see here there's no change as I refresh because that's just a new syntax. And now for italics, the new syntax is EM for emphasis or emphasized. So if you want to add emphasis to text, you would italicize it, or with the new tagging syntax, it's EM for emphasis. So save this, refresh, and we see here there's no change because that still works exactly the same way. So again, the old way is with the B and I tags. The newer way, which is the way I would suggest doing it as you go throughout this course, is the strong tag and the EM for emphasis tag. All right, that's really all there is to this lecture. Hopefully you found it pretty straightforward. Again, you may want to play around with different headers, adding more paragraphs, etc. But everything should have been straightforward right now. All we've covered is just a few basic tags such as heading tags, paragraph tags, and bold and italics. Okay, thanks everyone, and I will see you at the next lecture.